Do you know about the drastic life changes you can have when your emotional literacy is top notch? Hi, I'm Uma, and I am going to guide you through emotional literacy in my series of videos. I took my classic shamanic training and I upped it up a notch so we can use our spiritual talents in the depth that a classical education provides, but quicker, faster, and we can use it in a depth that is appropriate for our modern times. And part of this education is emotional literacy. And since I got more and more emails in the last days that asked about emotional questions, I decided to do a YouTube series and make it freely available of how understanding the shamanic ways gives you even more depth in your emotional literacy. Let's dive into it. Come with me as I show you how you can improve your emotional literacy and come to a depth that can clearly change your life. In this first video of the series I'm going to produce, we're talking about emotions in general, the history of it, and then we dive into anger. First of all, let's speak about emotional literacy and why is it still a topic in our modern days where we have so much knowledge and where we have so many opportunities to learn psychologically how to function better as human beings. Well, part of it is that people still are afraid of emotions, of their own emotions and of the emotions of others. And that has a history. The awareness of emotions and the how we can deal with it comes on a spectrum. And on one side of the spectrum, there are people who are very open, who enter a room and know immediately what everybody's feeling. It's like they walk into a room full of emotions and then at the end cannot distinguish which one are theirs and which ones are the emotions of other people. So this is one side of the spectrum where we have all this emotional energy that people can receive. And on the other side of the spectrum, there are people who are not aware of emotions, who don't feel them as much, or who are so afraid of emotions that they push them away until they cannot feel them anymore. And then there is anything in between. More on this side of the scale, where you avoid emotions, you have things like gaslighting. You see someone else expressing their feelings and you say, no, that's not true, because you cannot deal with the emotional fact that is given. On this side of the spectrum, you have a lot of empathy. You have people who get sad because someone else is sad. And with that, might even take away emotions of other people. And I would say the healthy is not to stay in the middle, but the healthy is to really have a full spectrum to yourself. Because sometimes we need to really shut out emotions and function rationally. And in a crisis, you cannot feel with the other people. You have to do stuff to create a base where everyone's safe again. And then you can go into feeling. And then there are people who are in a crisis and they're frozen and cannot say what they're feeling. So then it's good if you're on this side of the spectrum and if you can help make their emotions more available for them because they cannot get out of their freeze. And if they have someone to translate, then it's easier to come out of this freeze state. So instead of aiming for the middle, aim for everything because the more room you can hold for emotions, the more information you get about your own life and the life of other people. And that makes living all more fun and richer. So, in a historical context, why people end up on this side where feeling emotions is complicated might be a change in DNA. You heard right, a change in DNA. Because for hundreds and hundreds of years, people drank alcohol instead of water. It was very watered down alcohol, but nevertheless, alcohol was constantly in the system. And now, with our research that we have available now, we know that this changes the DNA of children while they are in the womb. And one of the earliest symptoms that comes from that is a lack of empathy, that these emotional informations cannot be processed in a normal way. Right now, we have a rise in neurodiversity. Neurodiversity also has this whole spectrum. So, if you know someone who is in autism spectrum and they seem not able to understand emotions, that can be that their system is shutting down because they're on this side, because they feel too much or they recognize too much. So don't judge too quickly. This syndrome that comes from drinking alcohol while being pregnant for hundreds of years, this influenced how people understood emotions, dealt with emotions, could talk about them, and how much our consciousness could evolve. Because that's a limiting factor. If you cannot use your emotions in the best possible way, your growth of consciousness has a limit. There is a glass ceiling you cannot cross if you're not able to process the information of emotions properly. Now we're able to drink water. So now we only have certain people who pass down this DNA change by drinking alcohol while being pregnant. But on the other hand, we have epigenetics. And epigenetics get passed down to children and even more so to grandchildren. That means if there is a trauma in the family that is not dealt with properly and healed properly, then behavior and symptoms and illnesses get passed down to children and even more so to grandchildren. And that can create changes in DNA too. Like the probability of some illnesses expressing themselves rises because of unhealed ancestral trauma. And that too can create a difficulty with emotions. So either there's a lack of fear, too much fear, fear of anger, fear of sadness. Any emotion can be perceived as dangerous in a family system due to this unhealed ancestral trauma. If any of that describes you, then you have to know that you still can gain emotional literacy because your brain has neuroplasticity. So you can grow into emotional literacy. And you have to know that depending on the severity that you lived through in your life or that your ancestors lived through, it may take time and it might take grit. So you really have to want it. And maybe that is something for a whole other video. How do we want something that will initially be very uncomfortable because of the fear of emotions that we have ingrained in our bones since generations? We are afraid of anger, which is why this is the first video expressing anger. We are afraid of someone exploding and destroying. We are afraid of our own anger of exploding and destroying. So we just bottle it up. But let me tell you, that is not the only way to deal with that. And It's not the only way to deal with emotions to just let them explode or take over. The contrary, the more emotional literate you are, the more you get the information from this emotion, and the quicker you can deal with that additional information without the emotion needing to grow. So that's really a benefit that everybody should aim for. The moment we realize that our body goes into a certain direction of emotion, we already have all the information that we need. The emotion then is just rising if we ignore the information that the emotion provides. So if you can grow your emotional literacy to a point where you get the information at a very early stage, then you have won. Then you don't need to explode full of anger or fall into depression when sadness would do. And that for me is reason enough to become emotionally literate. But what could it be for you? So before we continue here, maybe you pause the video and ask yourself, why should I invest in becoming emotionally literate? Why do I want to have more information in life and more capacity to be self-empowered in life through that information? Why do I want a change that I can do for myself? So why do I want to get out of the helplessness that can occur when we do not know what to do with emotions? When we are like helpless, just drowning in emotions. Why do I want to get out of that? I know it seems quite obvious when I put it that way, but you have to know for yourself. Why would you want to do that? Because it's going to be work. It's not just flowing along and then suddenly you're emotionally literate and you know what to do. But you really have to look at yourself. You really have to stand up for yourself. And that's something that requires grit. So please do that. Please find out why you should do that. Another historical fact that I want to mention is the patriarchy. Oh my God, source of all evil as it seems nowadays, right? But yeah, patriarchy has negative effects on women and on men. So men in patriarchy are required to feel less. Of course, they don't feel less because they're human. They feel a normal amount of emotions, just like everybody else. But due to this brainwashing that men are rational and not emotional, they have less availability to learn emotional literacy. Because that would be a feminine thing to do or something, whatever patriarchy makes out of this. So that keeps men from really engaging in learning about emotions. Because in patriarchy, doing something that is presented as being a woman's thing would lower your status. And patriarchy is all about status, it's all about power. So if you do something that is too far out there in the woman area, then you lower your status because women have a lower status than men in patriarchy. And that would make you side with women. That would make you lose power. Even if you present as a man in society and you want to go into emotional literacy, it might be that you have subconscious reactions against that because of the loss of power that you would perceive when you go into emotional literacy. We all have these things, these thought patterns of patriarchy in our systems, and we have to get to know them, to befriend them, and to change them to be able to grow in a certain direction. So if you find that you resist emotional literacy because you think you would be too much feminine if you would be emotional literate, then I recommend you to look at the power you gain from emotional literacy. Because it's way easier to take a thought pattern and just rewrite it with something else that is more powerful than to take a thought pattern and eliminate it. Which is why religions all over the world took dates that were important for people before and just rewrote the story with their own narrative. It's the easiest way to change a brain pattern. You just do the same. You take your, but I will lose power if I am being too feminine, into something that will make me more powerful because I can read other people's emotions and can act accordingly and have more information about the situation. And more information is more power. And then you have a new story in your mind, which opens up the door to emotional literacy. So go ahead, find your new story about why emotional literacy would be a cool thing to do that would raise your status and that would raise your power, because then it's easier to learn it.